Finally, I could not give my last lecture without mentioning the greatest economist of the 20th century and the person who has had the most influence on my own thinking of how one should approach the field of economics. This is Milton Friedman. He practically invented monetary economics and educated millions of people around the world with his free-to-choose book and television series. He almost single-handedly ended the military draft. He invented the idea of educational vouchers that is revolutionizing primary and secondary education and changed forever the way we think about inflation, exchange rates, and regulation. His ideas have been the inspiration for millions to seek freedom in the former Soviet bloc countries and in India and China. I'm saddened that he is no longer around to comment on all the silliness going on in Washington these days. However, it remains to be seen who will be this century's greatest economist. I suspect that he or she has not yet been born. But possibly, 100 years from now, some gray-haired economist wearing a bow tie will be giving his Franciscan University last lecture and will talk about that person and how that person has helped transform the world economy. I plan to listen in on that lecture, but from a far-off place. However, that economist of the future will not be using a PC with PowerPoint slides. Those ancient technologies will have long ago been discarded in place of others that we cannot yet dream are possible. Thank you all for being here. May God bless you all, and may God bless this fine university. Well, I would say that continued growth is not cancer. It is wealth creation. That is, when the economy grows, what that means is that the output per person in the economy increases. And things don't cost more, they cost less. That is, think about your house. Your house is much cheaper to live in than it was 50, 100, 200 years ago. You may have had to spend 100% of your income 100 years ago to have that house. Today, you spend a much smaller percentage of your income. You spend a smaller percentage of your income to eat and to travel and to do everything. So things don't cost more, they are much, much cheaper today. But the problem is that, there are no limits to what we can grow. Because resources can be rearranged into different things. You take the periodic chart. It has a number of what do we call them? Elements. Thank you. And those elements have an unlimited number of combinations. And so as we discover more and more of those combinations, we can grow more and more with less and less. And so I wouldn't worry about growing. If you go back in history, go back 100 years ago, 200 years ago, the people then could not have imagined how wealthy we are. We live better than the richest king lived a century or 2 centuries ago. I wouldn't take the place of Henry VIII or anybody because they lived in squalor and they didn't have any internet. So I'll take my house, my humble little house, rather than that castle that they lived in with all their servants. Of course, Henry VIII had, what, 400 people to prepare his meal. But I have more than that. I've got all the people all the farmers in the world. I've got all the people who create the fertilizer and all the truck drivers and all the people who get that restaurant, who build the restaurant and so forth. And so there are far more than 400 people who serve me dinner when I go to the Triple Play Cafe. Well, I think certainly we are better off if our neighbors are wealthier. You're much better off if your next door neighbor is a millionaire than if he's on welfare. So these countries becoming wealthier are going to be better for us because they'll open up markets for the things that we have an advantage in. We used to have what David Ricardo called comparative advantage in the production of steel. We had the finest steel. We developed steel here in the United States. We had the natural resources. But we've lost that comparative advantage to other countries. But we maintain comparative advantage in other things where we export around the world. And so many of the problems that we have in the country are due to bad governmental policies, such as high taxes, regulation. For example, here in Ohio, we have a higher than average unemployment rate in Ohio. The reason being that we are one of the highest tax states in the country. We have a very high graduated marginal tax rate, and we are not very friendly to businesses. And as a result, businesses move to friendlier places where their taxes are lower, where the regulations are less. So we need to learn as citizens that we need to create an environment for entrepreneurs to make investments. If not, then we will suffer, but other people will prosper. If you go to Texas or Florida or some of these states that don't have income taxes, they are much more prosperous than we are. We didn't have an income tax until 1971, and we were a very wealthy state in 1971. Since then, we have raised the tax and we have become poorer. So we have to look at the various policies that create business opportunities and attract business people. It was a horrible thing because the way that the government took over General Motors was that they stole the property of the bondholders. And that's not constitutional. It's not the American way to take money away from some people and give it to other people, which was the labor unions that represent General Motors. So the best thing that could have happened to General Motors would be to go bankrupt. And you're a bankruptcy lawyer, you know bankruptcies can be messy, but they can be quite orderly, and companies don't necessarily go out of business who go bankrupt. They reorganized. The assets of General Motors would have been sold off to somebody who could use them better than General Motors could. And the economy and the car industry would continue on. I would still drive a car, you would still drive a car, even if there was no General Motors.
That or do you?
Well, there again, if the federal government has the ability and the power to bail out the states, then of course the states undertake riskier behavior. And so I would...
If they go bankrupt, then what?
Well, if they go bankrupt, then no one will lend them any money, and they'll have to balance the budget. I like, my favorite quote from Milton Friedman is that the thing to do with the public schools is make them private. So we would solve all those problems of socialism in the schools if they were not socialist vehicles.
And how can we do that?
Oh.
We vote for people who have read Capitalism and Freedom. I teach full courses on that question. But essentially, during a crisis like we have now, capitalism comes under scrutiny because the critics of capitalism will automatically stand up and say it's the failure of capitalism and that's why we have this crisis. But this was not a failure of capitalism, this was a failure of government. Everything that went wrong in this crisis was something that government did wrong. It's a result of some ill-conceived government involvement in the economy where they should not have been. And so certainly the marketplace is not a zero-sum game. If I am better, that doesn't mean that you are worse off. Just like Jefferson said, if I light my candle at yours, you are not diminished, and there is more light in the world. And that's true of not just ideas, which Jefferson was talking about, but it's true of trading with one another. As we trade with one another, we become dependent on one another, and we become appreciative of one another, and we have an interest in each other's well-being. I would point out that even though we do have environmental problems today, those environmental problems are not nearly as bad as they were historically. If you had lived in New York City in 1850, the streets would have been full of horse manure. And you know why those row buildings have high steps on them? And it's because when it rained, the horse manure wouldn't run into the houses. And so the automobile came around and cleaned up all the horse manure. Of course, it created some pollution of its own, but we can deal better with the pollution from the automobile than we can with the pollution from the horse. And so as technology advances, we will have better and better ways of dealing with those resources. We will be able to create more biodegradable materials. We'll be able to create more ways of dealing with those products that are hard to recycle and hard to break down. So I have every faith that as we grow and as we gain our knowledge, that these problems will become less and less of a problem. We're running out of all natural resources, but the prices are coming down. Why? Because we're using them more efficiently. And so as technology comes about, we can deal with more and more decreases in natural resources availability, but we can use them much more wisely. So we are running out of oil, but it's not a problem, because we will find something else and we will run out of renewables, but we'll find something else. We went through the Stone Age, but we did not run out of stones. We went to something better.
Thank you very much, Professor Zoric.